I'm Nikichi Taifa. I'm the director of the Reparation Education Project and a longtime reparations advocate. We're pleased to be able to share with you today. And I don't want to forget about Teresa, our attorney here. Let us know a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go to the panelists.
Certainly. Good evening again. And again, thank you for allowing us to glean from your knowledge. My name is Teresa Coney. I am a public defender in Massachusetts. My primary responsibility is working as the race equity training lead for the Committee for Public Counsel. So I'm responsible for training attorneys around the state about how race impacts the work that we do as public defenders. And really, for me, like the idea of reparations and people who I am training understanding the need for reparative justice for people in our communities, and the people who we serve as public defenders most often look and come from our communities, and how that like impacts the, I guess, like kind of like the intersectionality between the criminal legal system, the mental health system, the child welfare and child neglect system, and the juvenile justice system. Those are the four main areas that we focus on in the work that we do. And I kind of want to be able to take the work around reparations and use that as part of what I'm teaching to attorneys, in helping them to incorporate that in the legal arguments that they're making for gaining justice for the people who we work for.
My name's Billy Wilkerson. I am the managing director at the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center. I actually have the pleasure of knowing Sam in person, and I'm curious about Dominique as to whether you're related to Donald Cravens. There you go. That's where you know the name from.
Yeah.
Father.
Father, yeah.
So like a huge civil rights activist, has done amazing work nationally, internationally. He's like a legend, and it's beautiful to see you following his footsteps. Since I've been at Howard, I've had the pleasure of meeting Charles Hamilton Houston's great-granddaughter, Vernon Jordan's grandchildren. Just, I've just had the opportunity to meet some of our legends who are passing the work down. I myself am what I call a child of the revolutionaries, because a lot of people in the spaces that we're operating were brought along this path by our parents and the groundwork that our parents laid. My parents were Pan-Africanists who were closely affiliated with like Malcolm X and some of the folk back in the day. So it's great that you're continuing that legacy. I am a recent addition to this legal practice area. I spent most of my first career in the community, doing community organizing and doing work within our families and in our neighborhoods. And I went to law school as an older adult, and I graduated in 2020. And while I was a student, I was introduced to movement lawyering. We hosted the nation's first movement lawyering conference at Howard, and I was able to get involved with the human rights aspect of the reparations movement and get involved with the national movement for reparations, as well as the local efforts for reparations, again, as a student. And then because I had 20 plus years of nonprofit management experience, then I was able to bring that experience to the role of managing director. And when the previous managing director left, I was able to get my dream job straight out of law school. And so I've been doing work with the Civil Rights Center ever since. I've had the opportunity to go to the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland. I've had the opportunity to speak at the Genocide Conference at NIOD in Amsterdam, discussing the issue of genocide of Black people in the United States. Nkechi Taifa and several organizations collectively put together a tribunal under the We Charge Genocide, and had in New York had presented before members of the United Nations to discuss all of the different ways, and had over 50 different testimonials and attorneys from all over the country and all over the world testifying on behalf of Black people and the charge of genocide. So that's to say that reparations is directly tied to the specific harms that have been done to our people and the collective harm. So it's really, really beautiful to see people like you, Teresa, who are working in the space of in the intersection of criminal justice, mental health, child welfare, and juvenile justice, and for Dominique, who's working in the space for the pipeline to criminal justice, and for the housing discrimination, for you, April, and for you, Samuel, in the space of epigenetic repair. That is, all of those go under the umbrella of the need for holistic repair. So that's my role has been, or my interest area, my passion project is the reparations space. And so I have been able to work with commissions and municipal efforts and small local descendant group efforts and national efforts for reparations around the country. There's an estimated 72 efforts, and they're kind of evolving. And so there's different commissions that have started. In 2022. We were able to host the Reparations 2022 conference, and we had 40 people from different municipalities come out to Howard and talk about how to support each other through our reparations efforts. And so out of that conference grew a regular strategic planning session. So every month, an organization called First Repair hosts the regular sessions for strategy meetings to be able to be continued, and cities supporting each other. There's a whole landscape of efforts that have been happening. And my very first job / project on as the managing director was during spring break of 2021. And I'd been there for about 2 weeks, and we got a call from Evanston, Illinois, that was saying that they needed a constitutionality argument for like a bill that was scheduled to be voted on Monday, but people were dropping out because there was a conservative effort that had been led to say that it was illegal. And so that weekend, all weekend, me and a couple of students, and then later a few more of our attorneys, and then a few more people all kind of put together the letter that became known as the Evanston letter, which was a constitutionality argument for and a legal framework for municipal reparations that has been able to kind of undergird some of the municipal efforts when there was, because originally there was a really strong constitutional argument that people were scared that any reparations effort wouldn't be able to pass. So we're really happy that was the first, and it ended up being successful. And as you know, some of those have been, the payments have been implemented. There's a lot of complexity when it comes to any of these issues, but that was That was one of my first projects. And so that talks a little bit about Evanston, talks a little bit about the national efforts. And then there's specific projects in each state that I think my colleagues are going to speak to.
Okay, thank you so very much, Billy. And I think we're going to turn to Kenneth next. And tell us
Sure.
about yourself first, Kenneth, a little bit, and how that welds into your reflections on all this.
Again, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Kenneth Henry, and as Nikichi said, I am the female co-chair for Ncbl, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations, the longest advocacy grassroots organization in this country, advocating for the mission statement is advocating for reparations at the national level via HR 40 and the companion bill S40 on the Senate side. My first career, I worked in corporate America. I was program manager for Lockheed Martin. And when I decided I no longer needed or wanted to be a part of corporate America, I was looking for something to do. Born and raised in the great state of Virginia, where all of the beginnings of what would become the enslavement of our ancestors, the draconian laws that Virginia was always able to craft and other states would just come along and pick them up. The brutalities that they imposed upon our indigenous Native Americans. Sadly, mostly all of that came out of the great state of Virginia. And as I was looking for something to do, I met Cam Howard, who at that time was with Ncbl. And he convinced me that I should work on getting co-sponsors for HR 40. At that time, the highest number of co-sponsors ever was 45 co-sponsors over the years. So I decided that I would give it a try. And over the years, there has been an amazing proliferation of support for reparations. It is no longer a fringe topic. It is actually a center-focused topic. And as others have said, there are many efforts around the country at the local level for reparations in the various states and also in the municipalities and counties, to include the one I'm going to speak on shortly in New York, the state of New York. I serve as I said, the female co-chair for Ncbl, but I also have a dual role. I am the female co-chair for the Legislative Commission for Ncbl, and as such, I am the person who works to continue with the reparations within the coalition, as well as I'm also often out front of legislation. One of the absolute profound honors that I am proud to offer to you. I have some young people who are the co-chairs for the Philadelphia local chapter of Ncbl, and they have stood up the local Philadelphia City Council Reparations Task Force Commission. And they are very, very, very knowledgeable about reparations. They've been, for example, in Georgia, lending some support and giving some advice on how to actually assess an environment and begin to stand up a commission there. I do not live in New York, and I always have to say that. However, I've been very, very involved with New York from almost the beginnings of the new legislation that has become the state state signed law for New York. Some of the things that, well, actually before that, I got involved with New York because I was invited to come to Buffalo and begin to do some grassroots organizing and mobilizing with the people in Buffalo. And from that, I then became involved with the efforts for a bill to become the law that would be the standing up of the commission in New York State. They have not formally stood the commission up. Currently, the members of the commission are actually getting to know each other and identifying what needs to happen in order for them to stand up the commission. I was in Buffalo this weekend and actually spent a lot of time again meeting with the communities and working to ensure that they have a appreciation and understanding for the process and what will be involved in that process. And you must also understand that in Buffalo, due to the trauma a couple of years ago, May 2022, there's a lot of trauma in those communities. And it's a different kind of organizing because you're always having to work with the trauma, and you may take 2 steps forward and have to take 5 steps backwards. So it's being keenly aware of the climate and how that climate changes from, almost on a regular basis. But it's been an absolute learning experience. This weekend, actually had an opportunity to meet one of the commissioners who leaves me with a really good feeling about, and he's from Buffalo. So I'm left with a really good feeling that he will be an amazing representative and voice for the people, and certainly for the people of Buffalo. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Appreciate being with you all this evening, and good to be with my fellow sisters in the space. Yeah, so I come to this space just with, personal investment and general curiosities, having been born in Tulsa, but not grown up in Tulsa, always kind of searching for, my own familial histories, as well as knowing that my family was ancestors were enslaved in parts of Maryland as well as parts of Arkansas. And so, just being curious about that. That leads into organizing in high school, college, and then post those years, getting into food apartheid and education loss in Delaware in particular, which is, one of the smallest states, but also one of the, is the smallest state, but also is certainly overlooked in terms of the devastations of particular Black rural communities there. And then getting into just criminal legal system, voting rights, general racial justice work. I spent 5 years at Human Rights Watch, a large international NGO, where I built their racial justice research and advocacy program within the U.S. But also a major component of that work was bringing the U.S. reparations work. To me, it did not make sense to be at an org that had an international legal mandate and where the right to reparation is the clearest, and not have, dedicated work both locally and federally as well as internationally. So was able to, really build a portfolio of work assisting communities directly through technical assistance, but also investing a lot of time in Tulsa. So, my kind of life's journey brings me back to Tulsa. around a series of police killings, high-profile police killings, Terrence Crutcher, Joshua Barre, Joshua Harvey, and really being there to support the families directly, but then that translating into, hey, these aren't isolated issues. These are systemic, and these are all stemming as, consequences of the massacre dating back to 1921. So one of my biggest research projects was developing the case for reparations in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a human rights argument, a report that outlines a continuing harm on the Tulsa's Black community. So even broader than the survivors and the descendants, to affecting the whole population of Black people in Tulsa that are being actively displaced from parts of the historic Greenwood and pushed further out into other parts of Oklahoma. And so through that work, testifying before Congress, but also organizing hearings for the Tulsa survivors so that, they can speak directly to this harm and, what the federal intervention could have been in the midst of, state and local deliberate inaction. The report that I wrote is the basis for, in terms of its continuing harm, looking at health, policing, education, and nutrition as the key areas. There's more to say about that, the environment, specific maternal issues, like there's certainly more to say, but in terms of the actual report, it deals with that. And so that report is cited in the current public nuisance lawsuit within that is now before the Oklahoma Supreme Court. There's an upcoming hearing on April 2nd. I'm sure we'll get into more details about that, which argues it's a public nuisance theory, legal theory, after the efforts around civil litigation in the early 2000s failed, even though, failed to the degree that, they were dismissed by the statute of limitations. However, this was following the state's own commission, producing a report of all of its culpability. And so, in this case, this is one of the most blatant, genocidal acts in the US, and it's the most documented by photograph, and still, and even the call to reparations being so clearly outlined by the commission, there's still not being remedies that have been applied. And then more nationally, I've also been supporting the federal efforts, both HR 40, but also developing a new reparations framework. Well, not necessarily new, a framework that's new to the federal space, but is building on all of the work that's come to defining what reparations should look like. So taking HR 40 a step further to say, if this commission did exist, what type of remedies, what areas investigation, and what type of remedies could possibly come out of that. And that's through Representative Cori Bush's HRES 414 Reparations Now resolution. So I'll stop there and appreciate it.
Thank you so very much, Teresa. And we want to turn to our final panelist, now Dr. Cheryl Grills, who's in her vehicle. She's just coming back from an appointment, so we're glad you were able to join us. Cheryl is a former commissioner on the Historic California Reparations Task Force. So Dr. Grills, if you can just introduce yourself a little bit more fully and tell about some of your work on the California Task Force.
So as Nkechi said, Cheryl Grills, I'm a professor of psychology. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. and I'm a professor at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. I was appointed to the California Reparations Task Force by the governor of California. And I'll talk about that task force in a second. But before I do that, a little bit more about my background. I'm the granddaughter of a sharecropper from South Carolina. My mom's people were in Manning and my dad's people were in Charleston. Oh, I see it. There's somebody from South Carolina. And I mentioned that because when I looked him up on the census, they referred to him as a bag boy, which I found it's supremely disrespectful of this amazing man who, even though he was a sharecropper, he had the acumen and the tenacity and the will to actually end up getting out of sharecropping, creating a couple of little small businesses to keep his family afloat. And then he had 6 children, 3 boys and 3 girls, and he put all 3 of his girls through college, through HBCUs. And why did he focus on the girls? He wanted to make sure that they were never dependent on any man for their well-being and their quality of life. So I was like, hats off to him. He is definitely not a bag boy. Other things very quickly about my background. That I'm a psychologist, I think was very important in what I was able to contribute to the conversation and the deliberations on reparations. Too often we forget that we are human beings in this entire process, and that what was done to us and how we've endured and how we are coping to this day requires a real careful understanding of what makes us a human being. And what affects our perceptions, our attitudes, our behaviors, our choices, et cetera. And also how to make sure we weather the storm of reparations efforts, because oftentimes history has shown it's 1 step or 0 steps forward, 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 5 steps back kind of scenario. And so how do we use psychology to help us maintain our resilience and weather that reality? I'm also a national past president of the Association of Black Psychologists, and a proud life member of Ncbl, and also serve on NARC, the National African American Reparations Commission. So fast forward to California Reparations Task Force. The task force was established to complete the task of determining, among other things, determining the harms from enslavement and their legacy post-enslavement, and to identify remedies that align with the United Nations 5 standards for reparations. We had a 2-year term within which to do that. It's a 9-member task force. And with the help of the Department of Justice in the state of California, they definitely were our friend and helped us to produce 2 major reports: an interim report that was about 500 pages in length that laid out the harms of enslavement and the enduring legacy of those harms to the present day. And then a final report, which was 1,100 pages, that took the issue a step further and identified what are the remedies, for repair, what are the remedies that need to be addressed, and aligned those recommendations within the context of the 12 chapters of harm identified in the interim report. So we ended up with over 115 recommendations, which when you broke them down into their subcomponents, actually reflects 300 recommendations. And I say that to say that the harms were multifold, and so there's no magic bullet. A cash payment is not going to address the many forms of harm that occurred during and post enslavement. when the task force did it sunset? Well, actually, before I get to the sunset, very quickly, 2 or 3 things in addition to my psychology perspective that I brought to the task force was the idea of the importance of community engagement. So even though we were doing these 2-day hearings that involved public testimony, that to me was, we were in an echo chamber about who was showing up to these hearings and doing the testimony. And we needed grassroots community perspective on many issues related to reparations. So I was able to get the task force to agree to setting up a community engagement process that involved bringing in 7 what we called anchor organizations, which were organizations, community-based organizations in the state that were deeply immersed in various Black communities across the state on a host of social justice issues. These anchor organizations held listening sessions. We ended up with several hundred people participating across the state in these listening sessions, over 800. And then we also did polling and a survey across the state that included Black folk as well as people from other racial groups. And that poll and survey included over 4,000 people in the state. So in addition to the community engagement, I also, was very vocal on the issue around public education, that we needed people to know what they didn't know, and to do a diverse approach to community education or popular education. So within that context, we were able to set up a process with some startup. Sorry, my car is telling me there are objects on the road. But anyway, that there was a need for educating youth in this process. So we were able to engage 2 faculty at the at UC Berkeley to launch a community education curriculum geared toward elementary through high school and JCs, junior colleges in the state, that would be made available and free to all education entities and be placed in public libraries. That could also then be used for popular education by community organizers and other entities. So that is underway. And the second part of the public education was I was able to get some funding to launch a docuseries that was based on the 12 chapters of harm. So each episode of the docuseries focuses on a different harm. And we're almost finished with the 3rd episode and hoping that PBS or Netflix or some other distribution company will pick it up so it can get mass exposure. But the bottom line is that this docuseries is a way to take what's in those chapters of harm and make them digestible for folks, because don't know too many people who are going to read 500 pages of anything, let alone something on reparations. So to conclude, the task force did sunset, and 6 of the 9 members of the task force proceeded to stay in collaboration out of concern for the ensuring that the state legislature would actually implement these recommendations that stay true to the spirit and intent of the recommendations. And so to that end, we ended up forming a new entity called ART, the Alliance for Reparations, Reconciliation, and Truth, that is has a kind of core partner body, which is actually meeting right now, so I'm missing that meeting. And that includes real powerhouses like Catalyst California, which used to be called the Advancement Project, the Equal Justice Society, which does massive work around legal support for various kinds of legislative actions, and things like affirmative action. California Black Power Network, which is a powerhouse and formidable entity with over 20 plus massive Black organizations that are partnered with them in their network, and several other organizations. And we have now, we are a formal entity. We have a steering committee that has yet another layer of organizations and allied organizations across the state, and then an advisory body. And what we're doing is trying to provide education to the public, but also kind of keep the legislative, particularly the California legislative body, on point with coming up with bills that are actually reparations and not something they were working on anyway. And they were like, oh, this will work for reparations. Let me just throw that into the hopper. So I'll stop there. That's kind of where we're at with California. There are 12 bills plus under consideration as the first stepping out on trying to do something with the recommendations from the task force.
So thank you so very much. And I just want to apologize for being in and out. I was going to say a few words to myself and then turn it over to my co-moderator. There's a lot going on in the reparations world today. I inadvertently overbooked myself tonight. There's a big reparations movement that's about to, a meeting, the Reparations Movement monthly meetup that's about to occur, which I convene. And that's why I was going back and forth, making sure everything is right. There are over 200 registrants. And so it's a big deal. But again, I'm Nkechi Taifa. I am a founder of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, which was founded in 1987. And I am an inaugural commissioner. I'm no longer, but an inaugural commissioner on the National African American Reparations Commission. I'm the executive director of my own nonprofit, the Reparations Education Project. I did a TEDx talk on the issue, reparations and issues, time has come. It's very easily Googleable, as well as a book called Reparations on Fire, How and Why It's Spreading Across America. And I just see my role as one of information, providing education, convening, bringing folk together, and then let folk do what they do with their expertise, which is what our panelists have now. And what I'm going to do is turn it over to Billy Wilkinson, who's going to, I'll be on until 7 o'clock, but she's going to kind of take over from here so we can hear from you. But first, I wanted her to put some things in just a little bit of perspective so that we don't necessarily think that something that we're doing is novel or new. Billy, why don't you go in and take it from there? Go on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nkechi. So whenever I meet, especially folks who are new to the reparations movement, I like to tell the story of my introduction to the reparations movement. So when I was a 2L, I had a presentation. You can present on whatever topic you have passion about. And I presented on reparations and specifically the human rights framework for reparations. And I thought it was a new idea. I literally thought that I was like, here, I was like, oh, and here's human rights, and this is what the human, like, this is what the Declaration of blah, blah, blah says. And then I lined that up with international standards for reparations. And then I lined that up with the harms against Black people in the United States. And I and I sat there and I really, really believed in my whole entire heart that I was creating this brand new framework. And I presented it to the class, and actually they didn't know that it wasn't something new either. But I use that example to say that as people are entering into the space, and as the light bulbs are clicking, and as we're being told information when we're in our miseducated in educational environments, we are thinking that a lot of the ideas that we're coming up with are new. And so as you enter into this space and as you begin your research projects, it's very, very, very helpful to learn a bunch of the stuff that already exists. And so following this, I'll send you guys a couple of things that we've found to be very helpful. So Nkechi Taifa, you guys, I have a huge privilege of being able to have one of the architects really of the National Reparations Movement for African Americans. Like, she, as a very young person, got involved in this movement. But even before her, every single generation of oppressed Black people in this country have had, and even successful struggles, or at least tried to litigate those harms, mitigate those harms, and give access to repair. And so there's a couple of examples that come to mind. And I'll just ask you, all right, I'm just gonna ask everybody on the call if you are familiar with Callie House. Does everybody know who Callie House is? Raise your hand if you know who Callie House is. Put your hand down if you don't.
Okay, yeah,
Okay,
not
good.
the students you're speaking of.
I mean, I see a couple people on the call that are brand new. Hold on a second. Belinda Sutton. Does everybody know who Belinda Sutton is? Okay. Cato versus US. Are you familiar with that case? Okay, Sam, come through. April's got some history going on. Okay, so yeah, I just raised. Okay, so the reason why I name things like that is because there were people who filed, like who were enslaved, who filed papers in court to sue for their own, like, for payment for lost wages when they were enslaved. There have been people like I said, every single generation. And so what I'm going to send to you guys, there was a student in the Movement Lawyering Clinic a couple of semesters ago named Shakira Urban, who did an annotated bibliography. I would love for you guys to find some help in those resources that were provided. Nkechi Taifa mentioned already her TED Talk, but there's in addition to the TED Talk that she offers, that she refers to as the receipts. And so there were people who challenged the validity of the arguments that she was making, because she was making such strong arguments for Black people advocating for themselves. I mean, just the notion of abolition in and of itself being retold as a story that is founded on someone granting you your freedom is a false narrative in and of itself, because self-emancipated people, i.e. escapes, were the ones who were the foundation of the abolition movement. And hopefully you guys are familiar with the colored conventions and the series of, and actually Californians, as well as people all over the country, but like not just the Niagara movement, not just W.B. Du Bois, not just talented 10th who went to Harvard. Like, no. Like, the history goes strong, the history goes deep, and it's important for you guys to be able to familiarize with yourself with those things. And so I'm encouraging you to tap into the resources that have been provided by the panel that you're getting, but also as you're doing your own research in your specific areas of scholarship, to be able to connect with the things that have already been established. And I'm sure I missed a bunch of pieces, but I just wanted to name that thing in particular. So Nkechi, am I continuing on, or do you want to say?
I think we can now maybe open it up to the students for their questions, and I'm going to be taking leave. I will very excited to listen to the recording because I want to hear the quick questions and answers are as well. So we have another hour, and that's what we're going to devote to that. So before you do, why don't we ask
And also,
Teresa,
if we
do you
can-
have any comments to make, and as well as Shirley from National Conference of Black Lawyers, a longstanding veteran attorney that we're very pleased to have you on this call as well.
Before you can begin to talk to them about reparations versus retribution, you've got to start with some very basics. You know, what is reparations? And we've all heard that it's a check. So walking backwards to identify the harms in Buffalo as an example, and also Rochester, I use those too. We have to look at reparations first as a means for repairing those harms. For example, one of the things that just happened in New York, there is concern about asylum seekers. And there was a statement that was made by a not necessarily a state official, but someone who deals with asylum seekers. And the statement was that in order for them to begin to have any type of lifestyle, they need to earn somewhere between $90,000 and $100,000 just as a break even. But the people who live in Buffalo, their median household income is $42,000. The people who live in Rochester, their median income, household income is $40,000. So looking at what reparations needs to do, in New York State, the median household income is $79,000. So just taking something like that and working with the various groups to help them to see that the disparities between where they are, where the state of New York is, and where someone who represents asylum seekers is saying, in order just to break even, you have to have between $90,000 and $100,000. And then walking back slowly on how reparations will enhance their plight of life. The other piece of what I did this weekend, just to help them to understand what reparations should look like and what others are going to say it should not be about. There's a book that's about 25 years old, written by an author, Dave Horowitz, sorry. And often what you hear from those who say we don't deserve reparations comes straight out of that book. So what we decided to do, just to get folks comfortable with thinking about what the negative narratives will be, we're actually going to do sort of a contest. And every week, there's a radio personality who's going to introduce one of those 10 reasons why there should not be reparations. And we're going to turn it into a contest and have folks call in on the Power Hour and actually engage into conversations about it. The other thing that happened while I was there, actually went around and visited some of the churches. Another layer here of trauma, because now the churches lock their doors. And when you go to church on Sunday, which should be like a time that the doors are open and everybody's walking in, the doors are locked and you actually have to gain access into the church. So those are some of the things just in Buffalo that are issues that have to be worked with while you're still introducing the concepts of just reparations alone. I'm not sure I answered your question, but
you did. You did. Thank you. And just one quick follow-up. What's the name of the book? Okay.
I
You can
think
put it in
it's
the
the
chat.
10 reasons why. If you Google David Horowitz, it's the 10 reasons why Blacks should not get reparations. And I think I actually have it in my library, but I'll send it to Audra and she can share it with you.
Thank you. Dominique?
Similar disclaimer to April, so if you don't like Miss or Ma'am, let me know. But my question is actually for Miss Heath. Thank you so much for your work in Tulsa. The work we're doing is to advise commissions on the best routes to accomplish reparative justice. So I want to ask you, when you're entering these communities, what would you recommend to them in terms of either pursuing litigation or legislation when it comes to certain harms within the community?
Thank you so much for that thoughtful question. And it's going to look different for every community. I just want to start off with some more recent experiences of dealing with some families who experienced land and property theft by the government or by corporations. And in a number of those cases, there is no legislation that's going to transfer, private property back to public property or public property back to private ownership. It's a matter of legality. Like, these people don't just need any lawyers, they need lawyers that are going to protect their interests and not the corporate or the government's interests, because you need lawyers that are well versed in both, like, the property and land rights within those jurisdictions, but also mineral rights and other layers of rights that and water rights that end up overlapping with the property claims. I'm thinking of families I know, particularly in Schuler Fields, Arkansas, where there's the most lithium being produced in the entire world underneath these spaces in Arkansas. The federal government and, the Rockefellers and et cetera are bidding on the land currently that was dispossessed from Black families. But this land, they're bidding on this land for the purposes of renewable energy, because lithium is the main component for the Green New Deal plan. So you just see this compounded harm continuing. And this isn't a matter of an advocacy campaign. We're talking about some of the most powerful forces, trying to claim these minerals. And you're seeing this type of extraction as well around many places in the continent, Sudan and others. So it's not a disconnected global diasporic experience. So I wanted to name that. In regards to, advising on legislation or legal action, I think Tulsa is one of those cases where both avenues have been tried at the same time. So you had, your few Black legislators at the city and state levels that are fighting against, a majority conservative government to introduce measures. So there were efforts to file claims, reparations claims, right after the massacre. Insurance claims were fully denied and not recognized because of the fire ordinances. And because they were anti-Black and didn't want to respond directly to the crisis, even though that they said they were going to do so. And then later you had the Tulsa Race Riot Commission, which was formed by the state, that, recommends reparations is the right thing to do. Direct compensation to the survivors. And then at that time, we're talking about over 100 survivors still being alive. There's only 2 alive today. Leslie Benningfield Randall and Viola Ford Fletcher. And then you had, thousands of descendants also, some of which were connected to the civil litigation. So you had the legislative piece where, the late Maxine Horner, as well as Don Ross, were introducing revolving victim compensation funds. At the same time, the legal teams, Charles Ogletree, Sister Adjoa, and others are forming a legal argument, civil argument around, with the foresight that, hey, the state just documented their culpability. They also documented the city's culpability. So we have a straight pathway here. And so that's a case where those two things can feed off of each other. The federal space, in the case of Tulsa, kind of has been it's only been used, for instance, for the Tulsa Accountability Claims Act. You'll find that the original version was around the early 2000s, and then myself, Eric Miller, and Demario Solomon Simmons updated the current law that's been introduced but not signed into law, which would just waive, would allow you to proceed for a federal cause of action and waive the statute of limitations. So I think in some of these cases, you need both avenues, but you have to make a determination, right, of what the remedy actually is and how is it attainable. So some of this might be able to be rendered legislatively. That's if you have a climate and context that will allow for those measures to go through. In other cases, it's hurtful to have a legislative piece potentially undermine a legal piece as well. And so it's hard to, make a determination definitively, because I've just seen it have to play out, in so many different ways, depending on the locale. But what else did I want to say that? If there's anything else like specific about that, I'm happy to lend, any additional information too.
Thank you so much for that answer, Sam.
Thanks, Dominique. I guess my question is for Billy. And before I ask the question, I just have to give a preface. When we were looking at these commissions and we're looking at like their minutes and looking at the conversations that they've been having, I saw in one of them a mention of, Howard, we love that. But then I saw a mention of Justin Hanford. And then I saw a mention of your work, your name, and your work with Evanston. So when you mentioned that, that brought me to one of the questions I had about that. And I guess it's kind of two questions, but it could be placed into one. And the first one is just, what was some of the most complex work what was the biggest obstacle you found yourself when dealing with the big Evanston issue that related to the legal obstacles? But also, what do you think is the biggest legal hurdle that you were able to scope out when doing that research?
So there's a lot of different layers and kind of presumptions around that question that aren't quite aligned with the reality of the situation. So Evanston had been working on its reparations work for a few years. 2019, they had introduced their initial legislation, and then they were present during the early HR 40 kind of promotional things. And then when I got involved in it, there was a fear that that people were changing their votes. And the argument was around the constitutionality of reparations generally. And so they wanted to use the Evanston example to squash that argument completely. And so the letter that we wrote, we got the, look at my fingers. So we got the, I'm not used to that. So we got the call on a Friday evening, and the vote was on a Monday. And so when you ask a question about how did you plan and prepare and think about that in advance and how the commission worked this and that worked that, I think that there's a lot of moving parts and moving pieces, and there are a lot of real people who are involved. I think Cheryl can speak better to like what it's like on the ground as people are naming issues. And I think even what April was saying earlier around, you know, people having feelings of retribution versus people having, you know, kumbaya moments of reparation. Like, let's just all, you know, make everything better kind of thing. And there's a spectrum of emotional perspectives. There's a spectrum of legal issues and potential remedies. And I think the best possible thing that you can do in terms of your preparation for commissions and preparing information for commissions is to be able to talk about what has been done. If you're taking the time to go through and look at the minutes and you're seeing themes evolve, or you're seeing mechanisms for organizing be demonstrated, or pitfalls that people are constantly kind of having, that to me is a really good use of the time that you're putting into this. Because again, when I've met community members, especially in these smaller communities, the legal frameworks are completely unfamiliar. The kind of basic history that a lot of us didn't learn until we went to college, around anti-racism, around critical race, around just like kind of the around what reparations is in general, around history, like just knowing a community's history. There's kind of a my dad used to use the word polemic idea of historical context that says that George Washington was the founder of the United States, and every Black person's history starts with a cotton field in Mississippi, and then we were sharecroppers, and then we were, you know, we were forced to drink from a water fountain. Like, there's just such, you know, like such huge gaps in the reality of the situation. When I went to San Francisco I do a deep dive in every single community that I go into about the history of that specific community. And the San Francisco story was about Black mariners who had been successfully escaping and going to San Francisco for the gold rush, starting Black communities back in the 1800s. So it's like, you know, the ideas that we're kind of building on are not based on facts. And so it's important for, as you discover facts, much in the same way that Cheryl was talking about the census records, when I'm looking at like my own family's history, and I'm looking at the census records, it's telling me a story of what's happening. You guys are documenting history as you're doing the work that you're doing, and to be able to share that and to be able to retell those stories and to be able to point to the narratives that you're learning, and to be able to have those communities be able to tell their stories as they're being disappeared. Like, a lot of these communities are being erased from the records, and the records that you guys are collecting are actually incredibly valuable to the movement and to the historical record. And when we are in a position of implementing some of these, like what Nkechi was saying with the embryonic phase of reparations, what you're gathering is going to be critical to those spaces. Who you are in this space right now is critical to this movement, and what you're doing is absolutely essential to what we're trying to do. So it's very exciting to have you guys doing this research, but it's also very important for you to realize what you've got your hands on is gold. Don't drop it. You know what I mean? Did that even begin to answer your question?
Yeah, it got to the other questions that I did have for you, so I'm glad that you answered that way. Thank you.
I had another framing that I wanted to talk about. There's somewhat of an effort to minimize and diminish Black voices. We talk about it with the movement of anti-CRT and the legislation that has been kind of drafted and kind of like as different pieces of different Supreme Court decisions have come out, different pieces of legislation has come out. There's like a broad-based concern that that what we're doing may be misinterpreted. And I think Dreesen has spoken to this in the past. And Dreesen, if you can comment just a little bit on the ways that students can contribute to this movement, and as opposed to undermine the movement, even if it's unintentionally. Is that something you can comment on?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, as Billy just mentioned, like this is not happening in a vacuum. There's an ecosystem that this is happening in while reparations efforts are, at its height. The efforts to undermine, like to continue the erasure of Black folks is also increasing. But within that context, it's important, I think, to know that, to continue to substantiate and know the lived evidence of the harms and be able to point to them. But also, not get into, honestly, debates that have really nothing to do with the actual claims themselves. And you're actually seeing conservatives, not just conservatives and liberals, like anyone across the political spectrum, they're using the language of Black reparations advocates for years to provide federal and state reparations programs for other injured communities, right? So they're like, this was even a few decades ago, right? People are already making arguments against even Jim Crow era harms for Black folks. And yet we have a whole government program through the PACT Act, which is the Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxics Act, that deals with World War II harms all the way to more present day harms on Camp Lejeune Naval Base, right? These are cancers and diseases developed as a result of toxic exposure to toxic chemicals. These are multi-billion-dollar reparations programs. And they're being justified, as there has been a harm that has been occurred, but the same arguments that we're using around a comprehensive federal reparations program are being dismissed. So even, asks around, waiving taxes related to the compensation or related to the medical benefits. These are provisions that are applied not just in the PACT Act, but also in the Radiation Exposure Act, also in proposed bills that we see more recently from the California Assembly, not dealing with the legacy of slavery, but dealing with the displacement of a Mexican-American community by Dodger Stadium. So California Assembly Bill 1950, which includes specific provisions, to limit barriers to prove that you are, a recipient of these reparations. And so I say that to say we should not be creating more barriers of proving eligibility when there are several tens of programs currently that we can point to where eligibility is sometimes even waived. You just need to prove that you had the disease, you had the cancer. So let's not play into the whole, we need to prove, we need to DNA test people. We need to prove, where exactly your ancestors were at this particular time. I mean, some of that, there's enough nuance of our experiences to actually prescribe what needs to be prescribed. And so my advice would be to look at those existing statutes and programs, look at the particular provisions, study spaces even like the Jewish Claims Conference, which provides direct compensation to Holocaust survivors and their heirs to this day, right? They negotiate year after year and get billions of dollars. There's no executive order and no legislation that they need to pass this. These are 25 organizations that negotiate directly with the German government and get their money. But not only do they get their money, they get education benefits, they get end-of-life care. They also get, a free birthright trip. They also get attorneys assigned to them if they are not able to sign for themselves, or they don't have a next of kin or heir that can, serve as their power of attorney. So there's legal services through this conference to provide and limit those barriers for people. So let's not recommend anything. You see where I'm going here? Let's not recommend any additional barriers that don't even need to exist. We shouldn't even play into that. We should just be able to point to every other space that is rectifying this in a, very direct and particular way.
April has her hand up, but I'd like to say, because each of our answers tends to be fairly comprehensive, if not actually it's not comprehensive, that's not the right word. It invites a broader conversation and gives you guys a lot of background and context. And so what I'm going to do is ask for you to put each of the questions that you have in the chat. And as people are able to respond to some of those questions, then we'll have our panelists have the opportunity to kind of address your questions collectively or individually, so that we can get through more of the questions to be able to prepare you better for the research projects that you guys are undergoing. April.
You're on mute.
Mute.
Thank you. I was trying to think whether or not I should put all my questions in the chat. Anyway, the question that I was going to ask is for Dr. Cheryl Grills. When I envisioned the question, it was for Dr. Grills. And it's in response to when Professor Wilkerson said, every Black person's story start with a cotton field. And I was like, it's this reaction that is crazy, because I've had to deal with it as I organize people around food sovereignty projects, and people thinking like, I don't want to be a slave. All this crazy stuff about like working in the fields and growing food. But when I was researching you all, and just learning about the conversations that were going on in California, and I was thinking about Dr. Grills as a psychologist. My question is, okay, lower my energy. My question for Dr. Grills is, what are some tools, it's around secondary trauma, right? Like understanding secondary trauma that commissioners experience during the study period. How can they prepare to deal with these discussions in a trauma-informed way? What are some tools that commissions should consider like adopting and thinking about when we think about the satisfaction of healing that could come from reparations? And I'll stop there.
That's a great question. How much time do I have, Mom? Let me simply say, I think you're on point with the fact that other commissions need to be ready to address the impact of the audience and the general public's reactions to them. And that to be prepared for the sad reality that some of the harshest of the comments and the vitriol will be from our own people. And that hurts even more than if it was coming from another racial group. And that's in part, so for example, when I was on the task force, I did not agree with the lineage-based perspective. I was vocal about that. And rather than that being an opportunity to discuss ideas, it became an opportunity for people to turn on me, not on the task force per se, but from the groups who were commonly attending, as well as them right-wing and MAGA people, et cetera, et cetera. And so it almost felt MAGA because at some point truth and sharing facts never wasn't relevant anymore. It's like whatever I can say to tarnish your reputation, whatever I can say to hurt you, I'm going to put it out there. And so I ended up literally on a heart monitor as a result of the 2 years of that. And that's as someone who specializes in stress and resilience, and I'm certified in that and train people on how to use that within the context of doing racial healing work for Black folks, emotional emancipation. So all of that to say that people need to be prepared, and the tools that should be among the things that they have available to them is understanding what is stress and how your body reacts to it, and then having simple ways to down-regulate your body, right? And the breathing techniques, mindfulness techniques, things that cross the midline and shakes your brain up really fast. You know, you can do it in a matter of 30 seconds. All of that to help your body not absorb and hold on to. It's going to absorb it, but not hold on to the mean-spirited and harsh realities. And then there's just the stress and the weight of, you feel like reparations is on your shoulders, right? If you don't do this right, if you don't do your homework well, you don't have your T's crossed and your I's dotted, you failed the community. And so you want to protect yourself from doing those kinds of things, because at the end of the day, your body will succumb to the pressures. The other thing that's really important is that there were a cluster of us on the task force who formed a strong bond, and we became community for each other. And so we could help each other through those most difficult moments. And then outside of the task force, or a commission, having your go-to community of folks who can help you shake it off. Remember that song, I'm gonna shake it off? You gotta shake it off. Even in Senegal, there's a ritual that they do when they're trying to heal, and you walk through the town and you're literally doing this, and you're throwing off all of the stuff that, right, there you go, right? And doing things like dance and singing and cold water on your face, all of those things can actually immediately affect your nervous system to calm it down. So I think that what we also need to realize is that we're not just carrying our own immediate stress, we're carrying the stress of generations before us. And so where this might be the baseline of like stress and response to stress for most folks, here's where Black people start. And then from there, we go up and down in response to all of the things that we have to encounter during the course of the day. So then that means be especially careful and attentive to your well-being, your psychological and your physical well-being.
Thank you. I feel like we all should do a silent, like, shake.
Right. Shake it off.
Let it all out. Thank you.
So there's 2 questions in the chat, and I'm actually going to skip Dominique's because I kind of talked about that in the chat a little bit and then come back to it.
Can
But
I just
Sam,
ask a question about Dominique's question, though?
sure.
By that question, do you mean local governments, when they acknowledge a harm, would that make them less likely to do additional reparations processes, or do you mean something else? I'm just interpreting this question, I think, a little differently maybe than you're asking.
I think it's that first step even before that. I think a lot of these commissions that we were researching asked the town to do some sort of and I wondered if requesting that would, like, if towns would be fearful of doing that because it would open them up to further liability.
Got you. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm gonna come back to that because it is something that people raise consistently. But Sam asked a broader question, and I was wondering if anybody else in the group wanted to respond to his question about pushback, and ways to deal with differentiating opinions of the broad spectrum of Black ideas of what can and should be, and what should come to pass. Like, what are you guys' thoughts on that?
So I can start, and I will simply say that I think the first step is to have compassion and empathy for where they're at. That, sometimes the thought of reparations opens up a can of worms. That means I got to deal with my own and my family's and my community's trauma from oppression. It might mean that I get hopeful, and that hope has been dashed time and time again, so I'm afraid to go back there. And then thirdly, compassion and empathy for the fact that we are just as vulnerable to misinformation as other people. And so people have a disagreement with reparations in our community grounded in misinformation. And so I think starting from the place of compassion and then, providing people with information, saying, oh, so what your concern is that the government can't afford it. Can I send you some information about how our government has actually paid for reparations for a whole bunch of other people, and where, people weren't directly involved in the cause of the problem, blah, 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 blah. And then also kind of engaging a gentle Socratic method, right? So if people say, reparations, we should not get reparations. And why do you think that? Well, we should just pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. Oh, and where are we getting these boots from? And who makes the boots? And who controls the distribution of the boots? And wouldn't you like to, so it's really just kind of gently walking folks through, kind of unpacking the assumptions and perhaps the misinformation that they have as a start.
So I want to jump in also, pursuant to what Dr. Grills is saying. I usually start from the 246 years of forced-free stolen labor and the fact that you all have had a job of some sort. And as a manager, I actually have had employees whose paychecks were shorted by 45 minutes, and they spent hours trying to get 45 minutes that was shorted from their paycheck. And if you spend 45, if you spend hours trying to get the difference between your paycheck and 45 minutes that was inadvertently not included in your paycheck, how do you feel about the fact that for 246 years, our ancestors received nothing for forced stolen labor? And there's actually a study that just came out where someone took the man plus woman plus child hours of work, and they calculated it in today's value, and it's something like $3.4 trillion or something. So I sometimes start there, and I show them a couple of reports such as that to say, this is your lost wealth. This is why there is intergenerational poverty. This is why there is this wealth gap. And because of that, if you don't want to talk about anything else, we must actually go after the lost wealth of our ancestors in order to be able to say, 45 minutes you're spending trying to get compensation for the 45 minutes that I'm going to give you next week in your next paycheck. So that begins to wake them up, and they begin to see, oh, wait a minute, you're talking about 246 years. And as Dr. Grill said, talking about folk who got reparations. For example, my favorite story of who got reparations, 1892, 11 Italian Americans got reparations because a family member in 1891 was lynched. And the seated president at that time, Benjamin Harrison, felt that he had to do something to right that wrong. So he gave each one of those 11 Italian American families on his signature. He couldn't get it through legislation, so he did it on his signature. He gave each one of them $25,000, which today would be worth about $125,000. Not only did he give each one of them $25,000, but he wanted to, air quote, memorialize the Italian Americans. He gave them a national holiday. That national holiday is Christopher Columbus Day. So they got $25,000 each and a national holiday. And because there are some feelings about that particular holiday, when you come behind 246 years of forced-free labor and you talk about more the fact that that's where the holiday came from than the $25,000. I've not felt that I lost anyone when I've used those as beginning arguments or beginning presentations. So that's something I use quite often. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was very helpful.
And Teresa, were you getting ready to say something?
I was just gonna say, I feel I completely support what Kenneth and Dr. Grills have said, and I think the most prevalent barrier to Black folks thinking reparations are feasible is emotional and psychological. However, or in addition to that, a more narrower view, you'll have some Black folks, ask about the expenditures and having to pay potential taxes on, programs that, they were also harmed by, which I think is legitimate concerns. But even when thinking about, some of the more fiscally responsible, we've always been operating from a sense of scarcity, as a group of people. And so just reminding people that we spend $1 trillion every year on war, and we spend, like amounting these budgets, look, Black people and police generationally have different experiences and different viewpoints, right? Even when you just start talking about the local budget's commitment to policing versus, other direct services, that starts to get people's minds, I think, open around the feasibility question. Like, we don't possibly have enough money for this. I can't even put food on my table. Well, that's because they're deliberately, starving you through that, but that's not a lack of resources that the state or even that we have. So, yeah.
So with regard to Sam's question, my approach is slightly different. I enter into the spaces and work that I have done with a lens towards healing, and with the idea that reparations work should be reparatory in some mechanism, method, or like aspect. And so as I personally approach it, because I wake up early in the morning working on it, and then inch it in a little bit during the day and work, and then on Zooms until whatever time it is right now, then I tend to build into that epigenetic repair mechanisms for myself, for my family, for my community, for my loved ones, for the institutions that I work on and work with. Like I love Howard University, and I build in the things that I'm learning in these frameworks into the work that we do as a staff collectively and how I engage that. And then align my work within the movement with national, international, and local efforts. So like I'm involved in the DC because I live in DC, and I'm generationally Washingtonian, but I also engage in national efforts and working on aligning those things and having things that feed my soul to balance out the skepticism and the frustrations and all of those things, for me, is a very helpful mechanism. And regarding Dominique's question, one of the classes that is mandatory before you leave law school is rules of professional responsibility. And so when you ask an attorney a question around liability, I always have to hesitate because you have to look at the specific facts. You have to look at the specific set of circumstances that you're looking at, and you need to be a qualified person to be able to speak on a particular issue. And so I'm careful to phrase my responses in a way that is, because there is not, there's not like, in legal claims, like actual litigation and civil procedure, you can't go to court on a generalized claim. You can't say something bad happened in general, so something good should happen as a remedy to that in general, not in a court setting. You have to have a specific harm and a specific claim. And so when we look at specific things that have won in court, even under what people may consider a reparations framework within this space, is for Black people, for Italians, for each of the claims that have won or not won in court, they were specific in nature, and legislation is different. And anyway, it's long and it's complicated and it's specific and it's nuanced. And so the general rule of thumb is legal research for each legal question. And the resources that are available for that are much more available than people think that they are. There are a lot of attorneys who have expressed interest in being able to provide legal services and legal support. And there's more and more of us who are organizing around being able to support legal claims within the reparations spaces. The clinic at the law school in particular, the Movement Lawyering Clinic, there's an attorney named Britta Redwood who's been working with students to provide specific support for municipalities and to be able to provide legal toolkits for arguments. Justin Hansford has done a lot of work in that space. Nkechi Taifa has done a lot. Ajua Toro. I mean, there's a bunch of, Ncbl, what I'm saying? Like, we're working on those things specifically. And so I don't want to overstate what's happening or what has been done, but I think that the work that you're doing will work in tandem with the work that they have done, and be able to offer something that hasn't been able to be available in the past in the way that we want it to be specifically accessible for the commissions that you're developing. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit. And so it's 7:50. We've got time for a lightning round for each of the panelists and each of the students to be able to have a last question and a last comment. And I'm poking at Teresa just because she's kind of been, if there's something specific that you wanted to get your voice heard on, I wanted to open up a space for you as well, because the work that you've been doing in terms of pulling together these students and managing this process is very, very important and much appreciated.
I guess my question would be to the panelists, if there were one piece of advice that you would like for our students to give to newly formed commissions, what would that piece of advice be?
I'll say a lesson learned from the California Reparations Task Force is that we should have had the Black Caucus involved every step of the way. At the last meeting, they appeared, and then, you know, with the cameras rolling, and then they went away to start creating legislation, but without the benefit of understanding with, you know, the adequate depth, what we were doing, what the spirit of some of the recommendations were, et cetera. So keep your legislators tied to the hip throughout the entire process. Don't let it be something where they end up at the last minute participating, because it could derail what was a really, you know, fruitful process.
I will answer, in New York, my mantra is do not move forward unless you study California's task force, their AB 3121. Make sure you know the lessons learned from what they did before you get started. And that's for the community at large, because the community needs to be monitoring what's going on with the task force, and if they are equipped with the lessons learned. And thank you, Dr. Grills. I have notes from your lessons learned, and I repeat them to them all the time. So that would be what I would say, you know, don't go out and try and reinvent the wheel. It's already been invented, and what you need to do is just make it a better wheel.
Sorry, I'm trying to land on that one piece in particular of advice. But I think mine just particularly is community engagement. A lot of these task forces, you know, it's like it's just like an ancillary thing that is a part of the task force's charge. And instead of, you know, just creating, whether that's like a massive outreach even before the commission starts, to have a compilation of these experiences and oral histories prior to even the commission being set up. But there is no, what I see is, you know, lack of funding and resources towards, you know, actually reaching people who will be trying to file claims if you know, the particular commission recommends, you know, something around remedies. And so you don't want to be in a situation where there's all this, you know, incredible work done. There's also been strategic community engagement efforts in other places, like, you know, Dr. Grills was very involved in making that happen, as she just spoke to. But then you have other commissions who are, you know, 6 months, a year into their work trying to scramble to connect with the community, and the public sessions and the public comment is not enough of community engagement. That's not what the outreach should look like. So really emphasizing that to them, I think, you know, is also an important piece, and that the recommendations are non-binding. As hard and as arduous as it is to come to those recommendations, you know, really shaking the commission to connect with community members and then the policymakers to make sure that they're on board with these various proposals, or else they could lay dormant, like, you know, we've seen in other jurisdictions.
Yeah, and my 2 cents is to use the existing resources, the historical records that, or the factual kind of basis for what you guys are learning. Like there's like I said, there's so many specifics that it's very, 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 very helpful when you're able to build on what's already been done, on what's already been worked on, and to be able to kind of use the resources that exist and know that the relationships that you are creating in things like this conversation, once you get a part of this community, you become a part of this community. It's very relationship based. It's very like, we tend to know each other. We tend to see each other in spaces over and over again. And we're real people that you can reach out to when you have questions and you're trying to figure things out. So it's a very beautiful thing that you're entering into, and I'm excited for you to be able to be a part of. As big and scary as we make it, like, oh no, don't do this, don't do that, but it's actually really, really, really a beautiful space, beautiful work, and such an important thing. Our ancestors are really shining down and creating a path for you guys to be able to make it easier this time than it's ever been for us before. So we're down to the last 2 minutes. So I'm gonna go with one word for Dominique, Samuel, and April.
Go ahead, Sam. What's your one word?
One word. One word that okay, grateful. That's my word.
Inspired.
All right. Beautiful.
Hopeful that we'll meet again, like to do this again.
April always has more than one word, though. I am certainly
All right.
grateful. Thank you all for being here. Like my note taking was out of control, like behind the scenes. I'm sorry that I had to have my camera off, but I didn't, my internet was not being stable and I didn't want to miss anything in the recording. So thank you. Like I don't even know how to express my appreciation on behalf of myself and the students. We will definitely review these materials, look up all of the things that you have given us to look up, and probably come back with more questions now that we have a community that, knows what we are aspiring to do, which is to help commissions across the country make reparations a reality in the, most fruitful way possible.
Be sure to capture the chat. Drisa made an additional comment about legal barriers, and I responded to some of the questions in the chat as well. But yeah, I'm excited about reading the whatever summary you guys come up with from this conversation, because I think it's incredibly valuable. And if you are able to share the video with especially Nkechi wants to be able to review it. But thank you guys so much. This was a beautiful conversation, and I love to start on time and end on time whenever possible. Thank you guys.
Thank you. Thank you for your evening's time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Take care.
Good
Yeah.
luck.
Good night, everybody. Great to see you.
You as well.